This is Nick Redding, and you're listening to PreserveCast, a podcast with a worldwide listenership that explores the broad world of preservation from every angle, from drones to mudlarking and everything in between. Now, let's get preserving. History is a big field made up of a variety of disciplines. Finding the right people to do that job can be tough, but one of the nation's foremost history firms is working to address that challenge with the launch of bestjobsinhistory.com. We're talking for-profit history and recruiting the best and brightest on this week's PreserveCast with Beth Maser and Addison Williams of History Associates Incorporated. This is Nick Redding, and you're listening to PreserveCast. Today, we're excited to be joined by two individuals from History Associates Incorporated, both Beth Maser, their new CEO, as well as Addison Williams, the Director of Marketing. And we're going to be talking about what this dynamic organization does. We've actually previously spoken with one of their historians in a previous episode called Historian for Hire, and learned a little bit about what it means to be a contract historian. But in this episode, we're going to dig into not only the work broadly of HAI, but also a new website, new platform they've launched, Best Jobs in History. And so we're going to be jumping into all of that. But like always, before we get involved in something like this, we like to get to know the people that we're speaking with. So maybe we'll start with Beth. What's your background? Where'd you grow up? And how does one end up becoming the CEO of an organization like History Associates?
Well, thanks for having us. I grew up in Longmeadow, Massachusetts, a very small town right next to Springfield. Was a disgruntled, didn't get into the business school at Washington University. So one of my history professors jumped on a desk and started singing Civil War hymns. And I was like, history sounds like a good major to me. Then I ended up coming to DC for grad school at GW and found a passion in business history. Got an internship with a company called PHR Environmental, run by Shelley Bookspan. And I was off. I was kind of dumpster diving like Aaron Brockovich before it was a thing, and loved the litigation history. Then kind of wanted to modernize my skills, went and got my library degree, worked for a library consulting firm. Then, of course, I pivoted again to get my PMP and manage a software development project at NARA, the NARA catalog, and did a little independent consulting, taxonomy, knowledge management work. And then a recruiter called about HI about 3 years or so ago. And I always wanted to make a profit doing history. And it just worked out really splendidly as far as I'm concerned. And ironically, Shelley Bookspan is now a principal consultant at HAI. So what I've learned about this field is everything old is new again, and your career comes full circle.
Well, that's interesting. I like the part about being the disgruntled student who didn't get in, but then found their calling. And maybe at the end for an Easter egg in this episode, we can get you to do some of those Civil War hymns.
I don't think I remember any, but go for it.
So Addison, Director of Marketing at a history firm. What does that mean? How do you market this work, and how did you get into marketing?
That's an awesome question. I took the route that I think many marketers will relate to, and a lot of people who end up in history is, a passion of really old literature. And I said, wow, I want to get into writing. And it turns out the biggest demand for writing is definitely in marketing. But what's great is with a passion for, old literature and stuff like that, the big realization that I had is a lot of people don't realize the impact of what they're working on while they're working on it. And then when I actually encountered history, so just like Beth said, everything old is new. I had started working with History Associates as a consultant on marketing, and I just loved what History Associates did, largely because there's sort of an awareness of the cultural and social impact of what we're doing. Not to overblow it, but like the people who we work with here and our team really actually believe in it and live it and stick with it. And that's really energizing and motivating. So when I saw that History Associates was looking for a director of marketing, I raised my hand and said, that's me. I would love to come in and do that. What's different about marketing historical services is that you ride there's definitely more of a razor's edge where the people and their skills and expertise are what we're selling. So we do have to make sure that we can quantify and put a value on what we know and what we've worked on. But the team members and the stories that they're working on for our clients, those are sort of, those are qualitative. So being able to actually convey both is really important and actually really fun to work on.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, obviously, we've had conversations outside of this podcast and sort of thinking up like, oh, who could we interview at HAI who'd be good for a podcast? And it's like, well, they're working on this project, but that's not really something that the company wants to talk about. And, I mean, it's not all of your work is not all jump up and down public facing work. So it can be challenging. Whereas, I run a nonprofit and basically anything we do is fair game to market. So that's unique in that there's some confidentialities associated with the work as well, which I guess is different from some types of marketing.
Mm-hmm. That's even funny you mention it because for example, we have research historians who work in litigation, and in that case, we even marketing our confidentiality, right? So talking about the fact that we obviously understand that world and the legal world and litigation world and its sensitivities is a selling point. So it's funny, we do work across enough industries that we do have to talk to them all a little individually. And we've kind of set up, our entire online experience around that. And the whole practice of working with us, you kind of choose your own adventure and we say very early on, okay, is this a very sensitive subject or is this like a corporate project where you want the world to know, right? Like if it's a corporate brand's, somebody's 100th anniversary as a company, they want us to talk about it more. It's free advertising, totally different.
Yeah, totally different than the tagline for your legal team. We know how to keep our mouths shut. That's which I always thought was good. You must have come up with that one. That's a joke. So, I mean, Beth, what is it that, I think people generally understand that a CEO is sort of responsible for everything. I mean, at the end of the day, the buck stops there. But what on a day-to-day basis are you doing? Do you get your hands dirty in any history work anymore? Or is it really sort of overseeing the business of HAI?
That's a really good question. I don't get a chance these days to get my hands dirty as much as I used to, rolling up my sleeves and going to the archives, but I love to get a chance to do that. In fact, ironically, this week, there are 2 proposals on my desk with projects that I can work on. They were kind of towards taxonomy and knowledge management. But the day-to-day, HAI is growing, proof positive that a very good director of marketing can help drive business. And, with our talented staff here, it's really working on the day-to-day. We were just fortunate enough that we had a great year in 21, and I brought on a VP of operations. So, a lot of the administrative stuff is getting spread out and not on my desk anymore. So I feel this year, especially, I can concentrate, work more hand in hand with Addison and, keep growing HAI because we still are generally a small business and we're in a niche market, but there's so much opportunity. And it's nice that we can finally get a chance to really explore and be creative in avenues that we're trying to target.
And I suppose, Addison, maybe it's a good place for us to back up for just a second and let you give the elevator pitch for people who aren't familiar with what a contract history firm does and what a place like HAI does, the kind of work that you do. I mean, you kind of mentioned some of the lines, and then also to Beth's point, maybe you can flesh this out. Is how big are you? How many employees are there? Or that kind of stuff that people would be interested in.
Oh, Beth, I think we were just actually, reviewing 2021. I think we're at 47 employees right now. Is that right, Beth?
Yeah, and we're edging closer to 50. And we grew by a head count of 16 employees from 20 to 21. So we really are on an upward trajectory.
And, the elevator pitch, around, I think what we've really sealed and cemented is that everybody's got a story to tell, whether that is a story, for a narrative in a courtroom, right, for a legal, or it's a government, like the National Park Service that actually is here to preserve culture, or a corporate brand that says, hey, we'll sell more units of, we'll sell more bottles or whatever of their product if we tell our story, or even those organizations like associations and institutions, universities, museums, that kind of thing, who they are hyper aware, right? They are the bastions of stories and preserving texts and things like that. Everybody's got a story to tell. And so that's what we're actually we tease out, right? There are some things that we do that may seem a little bit more quantifiable. So for example, archives, we have, linear feet of documents that are preserved. But even then there's a human touch, right? Does somebody know all the techniques about handling each unique document based on its age or its irregular size? So that's the professional services pitch. Those are who we reach out to. And the other thing is we do actually split it into, right, we have archives and information management, which is, it's actually a growing field, especially with a lot of things moving digital, or people actually realizing the value of properly storing and documenting information, not just putting a bunch of boxes in a stack in a warehouse and forgetting about it. Although, that's often where we get called in, as somebody did that, and it requires experts to go help fix that. But we also have exhibits, and we work with museums and curatorial services. We can help tease out the stories for exhibits, and are often the coordinator on things like helping manage exhibit creation. And then finally, like I said, we do talk about our legal services differently, but actually going through things like the National Archives to find out, the exact date that such and such a property was used for such and such a purpose, because it's going to be material to a lawsuit outcome, something like that. Those are our core services. Beth, did I miss one of the major core services that we?
Well, just adding up on legal, another tagline is we've made a lot of people partner. So, it's funny. Our team is very good at sussing out the needle in the haystack. And also we've seen a huge uptick in collections management work as well. So, the tangents are getting, multiplying. So we're really seeing work in areas that a traditional history firm wouldn't have touched, 5 years ago. And, the pivot and the paradigm shift to digital is really opening a lot of new opportunities.
Well, this is a good place talking about new opportunities, maybe, and pivots, is to pivot over to something that you guys have launched. And this is not an extended advertisement for Best Jobs in History. In fact, I saw it and thought, well, that actually would be interesting for a lot of people listening who work in this field or want to work in this field. And so I guess you're not busy enough between all the different things and adding 16 employees in a year. So you decided to launch a new website. Where did the idea come from for this? And, what was the need that you were trying to address?
I've always thought of myself as a square peg in a round hole, right? Because, here I am coming out, like, I want to be I love history, but how do I monetize that? I've always been entrepreneurial. I grew up in a family-owned business, and my experience and my career path as, diverged in several different directions, where I became passionate about job searches. I worked for startup.com as their first taxonomist. I think I was employee 13. My options were worth nothing. It was one of those, fizzled out. But I really learned about job descriptions and how they're so poorly written and if people are the square pegs in the round hole, they're never really going to find an apples to apples match between job descriptions and positions, because a lot of people on the outside that are trying to find historians, librarians, just information managers. And, like we mentioned before, the paradigm shift to digital. Now you've got data managers, raw data, competitive intelligence folks. My network before I came to HII was primarily, library and information services based. And, they've had that whole conversation about, nobody really understands the skills that librarians can bring to the table. And, some are resistant to change, some are not. And it's totally age agnostic, right? You could have a 30-year employee that is totally applying themselves to, the new digital tools. You could have somebody right out of library school that's like, I really just want to work with, paper. And, so again, industry, age agnostic, but it's very difficult to find the match. And that goes on the employer side and the job seeker side. It all comes down to like metadata and ships passing in the night, because if somebody's calling it an apple, but it's really a peach, are you ever going to really find each other? So with my personal background and, my history of kind of matchmaking and behind the scenes to put, the right people in front of the right people at different, companies, there's a real need in the market for a niche job site, especially in these information, historical, careers and opportunities, that there needs to be a fresher community with people that understand how to get the apples to the apples. Does that make sense?
It does. And I'm curious what the need is. So you identified that there's a mismatch between what companies and others are looking for and how to find those people and how to have those people find the companies. Since you've launched, and I guess how long has it been launched, that kind of stuff, have you found success in that?
We're right at the infancy. It's really only been live for Addison, 2 months now?
2 months, that's right.
Addison's really in charge of drawing traffic. I just happened to be on LinkedIn before we got on with you today, and we're already up to 210 followers on our LinkedIn site alone. I think it's going to be an organic growth, for people finding us and putting in their resumes and things like that. But I have a long-term in my mind. I can see it clearly. I don't know if I can articulate what I can see properly, but, I want to take best jobs in history and get more into the matchmaking, temporary staffing and recruiting, and could just kind of build a community, because this information professional community is one that's kind of unique, right? Everybody likes to share information with each other. And I think a lot of people really just want to share information because what goes around comes around. It's not like, sure, we set up the site because we saw a business opportunity, but at the heart, it's a group of people that like to share and exchange information because, down the line, it could be next week, it could be 3 years from now, but like, oh, I remember somebody saying that on a chat room or something. I'm going to call them up, or I'm going to just reach out through LinkedIn. So, whereas you had the business goals, my underlying personal goal is to create a new community with people that that really get a benefit out of networking. And I don't really see, you've got the professional associations, but we can talk, that's another whole discussion on, the decline of the professional association, especially with younger folks that really only grew up with social media, right? Whereas, somebody in my demographic, my core network is probably, close to retiring, or has been like, hey, I don't need, X association any longer because I already have my network. I can just call somebody directly. I don't need to go, to the annual meeting and sit through these presentations where, I could give them on my own. So I think if this could bridge the gap, between those two groups, and we've got a new, fresher community with people that are really invested in seeing the new trends and just connecting them in a different way. Clearly we're still in the infancy of best jobs, but that's my long-term goal for this.
Well, I think that that's a great place to kind of leave that with the long-term goal. And then maybe we come back and talk to Addison about specific types of jobs that people would find there who are listening, who might be interested, and a couple other things before we wrap up. And we'll do that right here in PreserveCast. Historic preservation can't happen without skilled tradespeople to perform the work. And there's a critical need right now for those tradespeople. The Campaign for Historic Trades, powered by Preservation Maryland, is working to meet that need by strengthening apprenticeship opportunities within historic trades. In partnership with the National Park Service's Historic Preservation Training Center and Conservation Legacy, the campaign is currently recruiting for NPS Traditional Trades Apprenticeship Program, or TTAP. TTAP's an intensive 20-week apprenticeship that provides young adults the chance to learn historic trade skills while working on America's most iconic historic sites. Multiple positions are open for the 2022 season at national parks across the country. Visit historictrades.org for more information on TTAP and how to apply today. This is Nick Redding. You're listening to PreserveCast. Today, we're excited to be joined by Beth Maser, the CEO of History Associates, as well as Addison Williams, the Director of Marketing. We've been talking all about the work of a for-profit history organization and what that means and the kind of lines of work that they're engaged in, as well as their interest and the background of launching Best Jobs in History. Understand it's not a very old site at this point. Talked about the need and the matchmaking and where this could go in creating that kind of community. I think it's interesting, too, that you talk about the professional associations and even the large national organizations that used to be so critical with conferences and things like that. And I feel like, even in the preservation world and the history world, the pandemic in some ways accelerated breaking that because those conferences kind of came to an end. And sometimes I feel like I wonder whether or not they'll ever really come back the way that they were. Addison, very specific, direct question. What kind of jobs can you find on the site? Someone's listening and they're like, oh, well, I'm a historian and I want to get a historian job. Are they going to find that there? What other kind of jobs will people find on the site?
That's great. It's good that you asked. So the way that we curate the jobs is very specific. We said, all right, it's going to be history, archives, libraries, museums, and research, right? So that's the easy punch list. If you say, yep, I'm one of those, then your job is going to be on the site. That was one way that we tried, or that we sourced it up and ramped it up very quickly, is we've also curated jobs from partners that we jumped on with right out the gate. We said, even in the infancy, we want to have a lot to offer people who are job seekers. So right now we have around 500 listings up available in those industries. In some instances, we've also said, okay, there are museums and libraries and archives that have ancillary positions, right? So if it's in a museum, but it's, say, a design job or a tech job, those will also be on Best Jobs in History. It felt like it made more sense to be inclusive because there are some people who are just so industry specific, right? Say you've been working at a museum, a local museum for 15 years. Well, you want to find another museum job, even if you weren't the curator, if that wasn't your title. Right. Say you were working in IT, you say, well, I think I'd like to I think those skills transfer over, and we do too. Right.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious, there's a lot of conversation now, particularly we see it in the preservation world, about posting the salaries and what that means for equity and kind of just, letting people know where you stand on that. I have actually personally found in hiring that it just makes the process a little bit simpler. There's not as much guesswork. It's like, here's what we can afford. And maybe that's the way it works kind of on the nonprofit side. What did you guys come to an agreement on when it comes to salary visibility?
What we so often see is that we set a standard by curating the jobs that are the most transparent and the highest quality. And a lot of those do include minimum salary, right? So it might not say top range. I think that's where the old guard and the new guard is sort of compromising, but talking about minimum salary so that applicants can know whether it's in the right range for them and it's worth pursuing. And we're all in favor of transparency. That being said, it is up to the individual hiring manager. We've set it up so that, hey, you can put that information and it's asked of you, right? So that there is some way of setting guideposts. But ultimately, one of the things that is still true about history and research in libraries and museums is that there is an orthodoxy that is still in place. And if that does include more traditional practices of sort of saving the salary conversation until the end of the hiring process, a few organizations that list jobs do still practice that.
Yeah, it makes sense. So what's the future hold not only for your site, but history jobs? People can get pretty cynical about that. I don't know if maybe we kick this one over to Beth, but do you feel, I mean, you've hired 16 people and you've talked about just in the past year, and you've talked about how, you're doing work that 5-10 years ago people didn't even think about when it came to history organizations. Are you feeling sort of bullish on the future of professional, for-profit history work and history work in general?
Yeah, I think more and more people are open to it. A lot of people don't realize that you can have a career in a for-profit history firm. I'm seeing, I'm on the iLead Council of University of Maryland's iSchool, and we talk about this topic a lot. And, a lot of our work requires the master's degree. However, the bachelor's degree in information science out of the library school at UMD is I think it's like the third highest major at the university right now. It's growing by leaps and bounds. So I think that the skill set of historians and librarians, they definitely merge. UMD still has that Hills program, which is a combined master's in history and library science, but iSchools are called iSchools and not library schools any longer, because it's really had a push towards digital and more technology applications in the field. And I think we're going to see that more. But it's interesting, my presence on that community, I'm always like, hey, I raise my hand. I'm like, don't forget about the people that don't want to go the techie route, because there's still going to be jobs for people that like to, touch the paper, go to the archives. And, I've made a career out of not everything's available on Google. So, we have to remember that, Google has a lot, and you can get a lot, in this small 6-inch by 4-inch device that everybody, carries around with them 24/7. But there's a lot of other information out there, and there still needs to be curators and guardians of this type of information. So I think there will always be jobs for historians, and companies like HII and other firms out there that employ historians and librarians. I'm always going to be bullish on it, and I'm always going to champion these types of roles and organizations, because the skills and the analytical thinking that they no longer teach in school, K through 12, it's going to be in demand. And there's got to be people that still know how to employ these skills in any job.
Yeah, I like that. And I think we've come up with your new tagline, not everything's on Google, HAI.
It's going on the homepage now.
There it is. He's doing it as we speak. So
he probably is.
Yeah, this is really interesting. It's fun to hear what you guys are up to, and see how far you're trying to push the envelope on what it is that history research is, and hopefully people will not only check out your website but also check out Best Jobs in History. We'll put links to both of them in the show notes. Before we go, we like to ask everyone who comes on what their favorite historic site is. So we'll start with Addison, and then we'll come over to Beth.
Well, I went to Chartres Cathedral in France, and that was like, it was such an old structure, but so hand detailed, and it had made it, into the modern world. That was the most impactful historic site I've ever visited. I remember while I was there, I was like, wow, it's a cathedral, right? So I guess it is not a village. So, I guess people are going to come and have services there and mass and stuff like that. Actually, no, they had one Bible, and it was behind, giant iron gates. So I realized that they even had a sense there of the historic value and sort of the the preservation nature. It wasn't in current use anymore, like I had suspected it would be for some reason. And at that point, I realized, okay, a truly historic site is just sometimes it's a little different. That they make a decision on how they're going to use it.
Like it. And where would you go, Beth?
I will take any chance to go back to the historic fort at the San Juan National Historic Site. I just love it. And I was at Fort Sumter last week, but San Juan Fort, awesome. Anybody should go there.
When was the last time you were there?
I would say probably about 4 years ago.
Well, it seems like it's time probably to get back, I guess.
Any time to go to San Juan is a good time.
Exactly. Maybe there's some research that can be done down there.
We actually are processing a collection from there right now.
See, it would just be, I think it would be in good business practice for you to go down there and just check in, make sure things are going okay.
We'll get right on it.
So it's been so much fun to have both of you here, hear what you're doing. We'll have to have you back as the site continues to expand, and hear about the usage patterns and what you're finding. And want to thank both of you for joining us today in PreserveCast.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, glad to be on.
Thanks for listening to PreserveCast. To dig deeper into this episode's story, head over to preservecast.org for show notes and our collection of previous episodes. Don't forget to engage with this podcast by subscribing, commenting, and leaving a review. Follow along on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at PreserveCast for even more. PreserveCast is currently recorded in Walkersville, Maryland, and sponsored by the 1772 Foundation and powered by Preservation Maryland. Thanks for listening, and keep on preserving.